good morning, everyone. My name's Ann Guest, and I'm Director of the Missoula Parking Commission. And I'd like to welcome you and thank you for participating in the Montana Downtown Forum and coming here to Missoula. We're really proud of our city, and we're really happy to have this opportunity to share our Missoula downtown with you. I appreciate you coming to the session on parking. It's always interesting because parking tends to be provocative. It brings a lot of people, and sometimes the audience isn't very friendly, but I think today we've got a good, friendly audience, and hopefully we'll give you a lot of useful information. What I'd like to do is kind of talk to you about how we're going to handle our session today. Typically, when you talk about parking, it centers around the topics of supply and demand and how you manage it. So that's how we're going to approach our panel today. To begin, we'll have Chris Naumann from Bozeman, from the Downtown Bozeman Partnership, and he's going to talk to us about the supply of parking. And he will talk about planning and developing parking facilities. Then next we'll have James Caniglia from Laurel, a city planner, who will talk a little bit about a different approach to the supply and demand. He's going to talk about TDM, which is Transportation Demand Management, or sometimes called alternative options for transportation or multimodal transportation. He'll talk about some of those options, and then I'll finish up with some comments about how to manage parking and looking at fine and rate ratios, and if you're interested, a little bit about what the new technology in meters and parking strategies are. So, but first what I'd like to do is get a little bit of a sense about who all of you are. How many of you feel that you have a perception that there's a parking problem in your downtown? Raise your hand. Okay. Now, of those who say you have a perception of a parking problem, how many of you feel you really have a parking problem? Okay, so we're down to 4. That's a critical point. Now, just out of curiosity, how many of you have some kind of a parking program? Okay, good. And then just again out of curiosity, how many of you have meters on street? All right, that gives us a little bit better feel about, who we're talking to. So I'll invite Chris to come up, and he will talk a little bit about the supply part of parking.
Thank you, Ann. I think every community, as we've seen, shares parking issues. I think downtown issues are always come down to parking on some level, and I think that whether it's a small community or a large community, we heard this morning that Glendive is having parking issues, and obviously the bigger municipalities certainly do and have been at it for quite some time. But I think regardless, there's some take-home messages that we hopefully will have today, and certainly look forward also to a discussion afterwards with questions and answers to hear about some unique ideas from all the communities. I think what Ann was alluding to, as the title of this slide shows, it's always a tale of parking perception versus parking reality. And again, I don't think that matters if it's the Conoco convenience store or downtown Missoula with 3 or 4 structured parking facilities and 10 employees dedicated to parking. I think this is always the case, perception versus reality. And what I believe in parking is, whether you like it or not, perception is reality. A brief history of some parking in downtown Bozeman. We had our first ordinance that addressed parking issues in 1883. As you might imagine, it was more of these parking types of problems. And they're the same, whether it was wagons and horses or Model Ts or Ford F-350s. So certainly parking is not a new issue for any of Montana's communities. We established the Bozeman Parking Commission in 1974 and started dealing with some of those issues on a more formal level. And we actually removed parking meters in 1979. in response to the opening of our first and to some extent only mall in Bozeman. And as our longtime parking commissioner, Chris Pope in Bozeman likes to call it, hence we created in 1979 our upside down cake as regards to parking. And I try not to read Donald Shoup's book, The High Cost of Free Parking. Sorry, this little wheel's a little sensitive. So perception versus reality. Downtown Bozeman has over 3,500 parking spaces, and that's all included: public, private, on-street, surface lots, parking garages, alleys. We don't have any quite this unique, but I love this picture. Again, this is where this business obviously is providing their free parking and their handicap parking. And I love the old adage or the adaptation of the Yogi Berra-ism that no one ever goes downtown anymore because it's way too crowded. And of course, there is nowhere to park. That is the perception, the reality of having nearly 1,200 public spaces that are free for 2 hours would suggest that in reality there are parking spaces to be had in downtown Bozeman. But what we have found is that urban renewal equals parking, and you could again change that to say downtown equals parking. We have a urban renewal district that was established in 1995, which created tax increment financing, which is a popular funding tool for parking infrastructure. And one of the major objectives of our urban renewal plan was to, we knew in the future, build a parking garage. We did an RFP for our downtown parking garage for the design of that in 2004, and construction began, I believe, in 2007. And this is actually a rendering, all the plans that we did consider, and in the lower right there, a rendering of the facility that actually is in operation today. So we looked to address the parking supply issue to move to structured parking from surface parking in an effort to intensify the parking use in a more dense structure versus almost sprawl, if you will, by just adding more surface parking. Land values are too high, certainly in downtown Bozeman, and I'm sure in most Montana downtowns, to continue to just park cars on surface lots, and we all have a limited amount of street parking. So to address supply issues, and certainly in the case of building a structured facility, it all comes down to funding. So our total project cost for building our garage came out just to be about $12 million. And it includes 435 spaces, so you can see the cost per space of over $27,000. And then at the top here, I've got what our funding sources were. We bonded our TIF and committed TIF cash to the tune of $6.6 million. We received $4 million of federal funding through a transportation appropriation. And then we also, I think, have, although not unique to in the country, I know Boulders has some pretty spectacular parking facilities that are wrapped in commercial space. Ours does have a commercial space component on 2 of the 4 sides, which we sold to basically fund for $1.3 million to fund the top deck, and really did get us a dense parking facility, high capacity. And the result of all of that funding and the design work is the Bridger Park Garage. It's a multimodal facility. It has state-of-the-art technology. We think it has a high aesthetic value with the commercial aspect, and that commercial activity obviously brings vitality. We have basically differentiated, as you can see in the rendering, and I've got photos in some slides coming up. The darker brick is the commercial component, with the structure being the cast concrete and yellow brick. So again, on 2 of our sides, one of which here is the multimodal. One of the multimodal aspects of the bus system does use one side of the garage as a transit center. So first, in the multimodal aspect of this facility, it serves as our downtown transit hub for our streamlined bus system, which is just now going into its third year. These are the buses that were modeled after the Yellowstone tour buses from the turn of the century, and this is a free bus system that goes throughout the entire community of Bozeman, and there's 4 different lines that hit different parts of town. 3 of the 4 lines do come through the downtown transit hub. Also, we've utilized the garage to provide covered bike parking, which certainly is a very important amenity. And even though we do have, as all Montana communities, a very short bicycle commuting window, although we do have some hardcore commuters that definitely ride 12 months out of the year. And then also we incorporated downtown's first public restrooms into this facility, which was perhaps as controversial as building it itself. Controversial, there was just a lot of concern over maintaining those. Obviously, restrooms have to be maintained impeccably, or don't bother, because none of us like to use dirty restrooms. Again, I mentioned the facility made a decision and a considerable financial commitment to use state-of-the-art technology. The facility is quote-unquote unmanned. There is no attendant on duty ever. What we have is a system that involves arriving at one of the 2 entrances, taking a ticket from this machine, which raises the gate and allows you to park, and then when you return to the facility, there are 2 pay-on-foot machines on the outside of the facility at 2 of the 3 entrances and exits, where you can pay. You insert the ticket you got it upon arrival here, and then you can pay the amount due with cash, coins, or credit card. And then in turn you get a ticket back that will open the gate once you do get back to the exit. You have 20 minutes to arrive, to move from the pay-on-foot machine to your car to the exit, which is more than enough. Can even have a conversation on the street in the interim. And then if you've used the pay-on-foot machine, when you arrive at the exit gate, you can insert the ticket you received from the pay-on-foot machine, which will simply raise the gate for you, or you can skip the pay-on-foot machine option or step and go straight back to your car, straight to the exit, and pay whatever fee you owe for the amount of time you parked with a credit card right there from your car at the exit gate. So multiple ways to pay and exit, and again, the upfront costs obviously of this system are much greater than the cost to put in attendant booths. I believe the equipment package was somewhere in the neighborhood of $650,000, but obviously looking at the long-term costs of employees and dealing with employee not only costs but staffing issues, certainly it's worth considering the automated approach for long-term savings to offset the upfront investment. As you may imagine, this was Bozeman's first parking garage. So unlike Billings and Missoula, which have had some for a while, the parking garage concept is still a reach for some folks in our community, and the automated paying equipment, certainly for those that haven't spent a lot of time in urban areas where this is common, was certainly a new technology to kind of get our heads around, but I think it's worked quite well. We do have Paul Burns, our parking director from Bozeman, is in the audience, and certainly I might need him to help me answer some questions when we get to that point. But I think all in all, after getting through some of the growing pains, this is proving to be a quite effective way to facilitate entries and exits in the garage. Again, the aesthetic design was of great importance to us. As with all our downtowns, we have beautiful buildings and a high level of aesthetic compared to other commercial districts in each of our communities. So the aesthetic appeal was a big concern and a big driver behind the design, and I think we largely addressed that with, as much as possible, again, wrapping the facility with commercial space and letting all the unique businesses and signage and the vitalities they bring really add to the aesthetic of the facility. We certainly, as you can see in these pictures, didn't try and hide the garage. You also need people to know it's there so they will use it. I know there is a Boulder parking garage where they wrapped the entire building in retail and office and perhaps even residential to the height of the entire structure, and then they rely, of course, then on signage to let people know that behind all these apartments and offices and businesses there is a parking resource. So we've did some simple branding with, you can see our logo here is replicated on the facility in lit signage, but certainly the commercial component adds a lot of the aesthetic, because there's only so much you can do with parking decks to make them look good. And again, I think that not only in the aesthetic of the design, but certainly the vitality that the commercial spaces bring is key. Our downtown is very much centered on our Main Street, and as you move off of Main Street to the north and south, we really are needing to add growth in those directions, and we knew this facility would be a starting point for that. So having some business spaces available in conjunction with the garage was an attempt to try and see more commercial development to the, in this case, the north of our Main Street. So we've got a variety, over 7 different businesses now. We've got an architect, a dentist studio, a graphic design firm, an acupuncturist, a kitchen stores going in, and we have one of the most popular restaurants in downtown. Actually was displaced by the explosion and relocated to the facility, so that was fortuitous, because that being Starkey's, is definitely a commercial anchor. But you can see we've got some, definitely some unique signage, this architect's office certainly knew the code very well to know they could paint their entire space bright blue, and it's without a permit, because it's a repair, not a remodel item according to code. Controversial, but I loved it, because you look down the street from Main Street, which is to your left in the picture, and you need something to capture your eye and draw you down that side street, and certainly their paint job helps with that, and it complements our parking color as well. And then it's a full circle. The urban renewal involves parking, and parking can be a catalyst for urban renewal and redevelopment. So the addition of such a dense parking facility in the heart of our downtown has really changed the whole parking paradigm in our historic district, our downtown district. It really allows a greater capacity. And, of course, you have your naysayers. We had plenty of the commentary that, look, they spent $12 million and things half empty. And my response is, if we built it and it was full, we're in big trouble, because we didn't get ahead of the curve at all. So obviously you build a big facility like this, and it's a 20, 30, 40 year investment to allow for not only current demand by providing supply, but also for future demand. So we were able to reduce our parking requirements for new development in our downtown zoning district because of the increased supply, and that then takes that pressure off the development community and allows them to either build at increased square footages, hopefully in height, without having to provide so much on-site parking, which we really had a suburban parking requirement in our downtown, and we've now moved to much more urban parking requirement with some pretty unique features to hopefully incentivize urban renewal and redevelopment, which we then have followed up with. These are some graphics from our recently adopted downtown improvement plan, which is really our master plan, if you will. And one of its, as I think with every master plan, one of its major components was to how to reduce parking requirements while still providing parking, and therefore incentivize new development. So that's sort of a quick tour of how we moved into building our first parking structure to not only address, again, current needs, but supply for future demands, and hopefully leverage redevelopment. Just as a quick example, although it be in the very early stages, we also badly need a downtown hotel, and we have a developer looking at a site that currently has a vacant building and a surface lot just a block from the parking garage. And in some early conversations, that development might only even be possible because of the garage, the ability to have that parking resource nearby, the hotel to do valet service to and from the garage. So those are the sorts of ideas we're hoping that the garage inspires. So I'll leave it at that, and then we'll certainly have more discussion during the question and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, I'm James Caniglia with the City of Laurel, and I'll be discussing multimodal transportation, walking, biking, mass transit issues, and I'll start off talking a little bit about something that may seem a little above anything in Montana as far as what we're able to do, and that is the City of Bogota, Colombia, and the Mayor Enrique Peñalosa has been one of the most forward-thinking leaders in the world as far as multimodal transportation. And a lot of what he's done won't apply to us, but we can look at different ways he's done these things and how we can reduce some of the impacts of automobiles in our downtowns. Mayor Peñalosa basically had a four-point system of reducing automobiles in the downtown, and the first thing was doubling parking rates. He looked at the subsidization of parking structures and wanted to reduce that. So he doubled that, and he increased fuel taxes in the city by 20%. All of that 20% was then used for mass transit. They implemented what's called their Cycleway program, where every day 70 miles of roads are closed off to traffic for from 7 to 9 a.m. and then 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. on weekdays. Every Sunday they have a lot of roads closed off that are only for cycles as well. Those things can be very difficult to do, obviously. Getting public works, police departments, emergency service takes an enormous amount of cooperation, and I understand they did do that in Missoula just recently with the bridge that they closed down for cyclists only. They also put in a toll system entering their downtown where they collected fees from automobiles, and a large citizen awareness campaign. One might think, well, that's a developing country, people don't drive as much, but it actually is just as hard there to get people out of their cars and not want to drive, because for them it's very much a status symbol to be able to drive, and it shows wealth, and it's hard for governments to get people to take mass transit if they can afford a car. Some of these things can be applied in Montana to a certain extent. Reducing parking requirements, for example, in our downtowns, and I'm sure pretty much all the bigger cities have, for the most part, have done that, but I know in Laurel, it was just about 10 years ago before new buildings in downtown no longer had to follow the parking requirements of other commercial businesses. So if you're a smaller town and you have that on the books, you might want to look at getting that off of there. We actually had a movie theater that burned down about 12 years ago, and it was kind of an institution in the city. The parking requirements were changed so that person would not have to build parking lots if he rebuilt. And he never did rebuild the movie theater, but many people wanted a parking lot there, and now it is a gorgeous public square in our downtown with an amphitheater. We just got a beautiful mural put there. And the business community was very, very vocal about wanting that to turn into a parking lot. And I've heard many of them say how happy they are that it is no longer, that they never made it a parking lot. Moving on to mass transit. In Laurel, we are just instituting our first public transit system. We're going to have a van pool that goes from Laurel to take the 8 to 5 crowd that works in downtown Billings 5 days a week, and then we're going to go there a couple times during the weekends for shopping that they can't do in Laurel. And for us, it was a very inexpensive thing to do. We worked a lot with MDT and their transit planners to get this system up and going. They've been a great help, and if you're a smaller town, that is something you should look into. It's incredibly inexpensive, especially if the city can use existing employees to do the dispatching and all the grant writing and paperwork. You get reimbursed for a lot of that work, so it actually is going to probably save us money. And one thing I think that would be very beneficial that I don't see much of is help from the larger cities to get more van pools. As Chris showed, their parking garage was $27,000 a spot. If we had more help from the city of Billings, for example, we could have a much larger van pool program and expand that and reduce the amount of parking spots needed in downtown Billings. So there's a lot of benefits to that as well. Another thing is bike sharing programs, which are just getting incredibly popular all over the world now. I know Billings, the DBA, they just instituted one, and I think as more cities do it, more and more people are going to just start expecting them in downtowns, and they will grow in popularity as time goes by. Beautification for pedestrians, I think we all realize how important that is to make people want to get out of their cars. That's been an issue we're working on. We've done some public art projects, new sidewalks. We're trying to get flowers in our downtown to make people feel like more welcome to walk, because we definitely have that perception problem with parking where some of the business leaders say that we need more parking, and I completely disagree. I think we've got a couple streets just a block walk from businesses and that always have street parking on them, but people feel they need to park right in front of the business. And I always argue, well, we don't want people parking right in front of the business because they're not going to walk by any other businesses. We need to get them out of their car and walk a little bit. And you could go to a Walmart and you got to walk a quarter of a block to get to the front door half the time, but people don't. It's a perception where people think if they see that store, even if it's a long ways away, it's not a problem. But if you have to walk around a corner, you can't see the store, and it's just as far, there's a perception that it's much more difficult to get to. Another thing to look at, which may not apply as much in Montana, but zoning and height restrictions for buildings. I think we all can get caught up in a really tall skyscraper. It really, they have good benefits as far as visibility are concerned, but when you do a skyscraper, it's very difficult to not put in a parking garage, where if you have a more European scale on your buildings of 3 to 5, maybe 6 stories, you can keep a lot more people out of their cars and reduce the need for parking garages. So I guess I will leave it at that and pass it to Ann. Okay.
So to begin my part of this discussion about rates and fines and maybe some of the management tools, it's important to understand that parking is about people. It's not just about cars. We tend to think about cars and where we're going to place them and everything, but it's about people, and people are who make your downtown. Now, parking itself does not make or break a downtown, though it plays a very important role. Earlier when I asked how many of you really felt like you had a parking problem in your community, about 4 of you raised your hand. Well, I'd like to tell you that that's a good thing. Having a parking problem is good. It means you've got people wanting to come downtown, you're having to deal with how you're going to handle access and have them feel welcomed, and so that they can shop in your shops and stay longer if they need to. So having a parking problem is not a bad thing, because there's a plethora of tools and strategies that you can employ that will help you handle the real problem and then how to handle the perception that you have a problem. I just returned late last night from Duluth, Minnesota, where I was asked to be on a parking panel to analyze their parking program. And it was a fascinating exercise. It was the first time I had done something like that. And one individual stood up and said, Downtown is the stage on which you celebrate your city. And I thought, wow, I really like that. It basically is saying that your downtown should reflect the character and values of your hometown. So not long ago, Missoula engaged in a very lengthy, comprehensive planning process and developed a downtown master plan. It involved hundreds of stakeholders, all the agencies. It was comprehensive in nature. It was adopted by the city council, and with that overall downtown master plan, there were a lot of sub-strategies to it. There was a parking element, a housing element, a retail strategy, looking at open space, transportation, and each one of those has their own plan, but together they must all head toward the goals and direction of the downtown master plan. Well, during the time it seemed exhausting. We had some ups and downs and whatnot, but in the end, once the council adopted it, it gave us a template, or a plan, if you will, to look at how we want Missoula to be in 25 years. So now, as a sub-strategy of that, the parking, we had a separate parking consultant. We developed a plan with lots of supporting documentation. So now as the Parking Commission moves forward in developing some of its strategies, we can say, as the board adopts them, does this support the overall umbrella of the downtown master plan? So it kind of gets back to the fact that downtown is the stage on which you celebrate your city. Then this downtown master plan basically provides a script, if you will, for all of the actors, actresses, and players to make sure that you're representing the values and character of your community. So kind of down to the nitty-gritty of how parking plays a role in it, parking is a first and last experience that someone has when they come to your downtown, and it needs to be a positive one. So what I'd like to do is give you a little bit of perspective, knowing that most of you in this room are from small to medium-sized towns. When you have a small city, you have 90% of your available parking on street and 10% off street. So when somebody comes into your downtown, there's a high expectation that they want to park right in front of the place where they want to go, whether it be a store, a restaurant, movie theater, whatever. We kind of call that the hitching post mentality, and both of you have kind of referred to that. There's that expectation that you're going to find a spot right there. Then as the city grows to a medium-sized city, that ratio becomes narrower, and you have 50% of your parking on street and then 50% of your parking off street. That's where Missoula is right now. We have about 1,100 meters on street, and we have about 900 parking spaces in off-street lots and parking facilities. So we're right at that 50-50 equation ratio. The trouble with that is that everybody in the community still is back in the hitching post mentality, where they feel that they have a constitutional right to free parking and right in front of the space where they want to go. And they're doing it, kicking and screaming into the new millennium to say, okay, you can't have that expectation. You have to think ahead and say, okay, do I want to park outside and walk downtown the last few blocks? Do I want to go park in the parking structure and then head up to North Higgins? You have to think about it. As the city becomes a large city like Spokane, when you drive into Spokane, not for one moment do you think that you're going to find a spot on the street. You know you're going to think, okay, now what parking structure do I want? And the skywalk will go over to Nordstrom's, and that kind of thinking. So that's kind of how cities kind of evolve with their parking. So for small and medium-sized cities, your on-street parking is your most valuable asset in your community. And that asset needs to be well managed. And there are a variety of strategies and tools how to manage that asset. But what happens is that people think that parking is pretty simple. You're just parking cars. Well, no, you're not. You're dealing with people. You're dealing with who you want to have on the street. You're dealing with a lot of other factors, and it becomes incredibly complex. So some of the strategies and tools that you can use about managing that important asset that you have are like time zones. Does your city want time zones, or do you want to have meters? The placement of loading zones and quick stops for quick shoppers. Enforcement plays an important role in managing that asset, whether you have meter violations or overtime violations. How heavy-handed do you want to be? Your parking rates. Do you want them free? Do you want them low to encourage customer-friendly parking? Or do you want them a little bit higher? If you have a parking structure, you want them higher than what's in your off-street lot. So you encourage people to park in the structure rather than park on street. A parking fine, again, how punitive does your city want to be? Basically, a well-managed parking program and managing the on-street parking creates a sense of respect. And the community shows that they respect this very valuable asset through how they manage their parking. So, but regardless, your most convenient parking should be your most expensive, and your least convenient parking should be your least expensive. So whether or not you have time zones or meters, enforcement plays a critical role in that. Otherwise, there'll be abuse, you'll lose respect, and people won't regard this very precious asset very well. So oftentimes when small cities like here in Montana start to think that they have a parking problem, okay, how do you develop a parking program? A couple of you already have some established parking programs. Typically, it's kind of the unwanted stepchild. Nobody wants to manage parking and deal with the complaints and the headaches that go along with it. So oftentimes, parking begins with a part-time officer who writes tickets, and he's employed by the police department. The police department really doesn't want to write parking tickets. They have bigger things to do that they feel are more important and critical to the feeling of the community. Oftentimes it's housed in public works because they're dealing with signage and striping and locating the parking. Again, they don't really want to deal with parking because they don't have the authority to do the big picture. Sometimes it's put into finance because if you do have meters, then comes the revenue, and everybody really likes the revenue, and so finance wants to get involved real fast. But a well-developed program will have a separate parking entity, whether you have an authority, a commission, or whatever. But it should have a couple of elements that are important, and if you are thinking about developing one for your community, there should be a comprehensive plan. There should be ongoing marketing and education, and there should be a parking person or entity that's a face of parking so that people know where to go. And they should have the ability to partner, because partnerships are critical anymore in this day and age. No one entity can do it all themselves, and oftentimes you have to partner with the Downtown Association, with the BID, or with the private sector to get things accomplished that will really promote your downtowns. And finally, you need to have a focus that parking commissions and their purpose have a great deal of impact on economic development. And it plays a very, very important role. To give you a little bit of history about the Missoula Parking Commission, it was formed in 1971, not much before the Bozeman Parking Commission. And it was formed as an enterprise fund, which was really quite ideal because what they did for us, the city gave the Parking Commission some seed money, but also gave it the opportunity to create some revenue on its own. And so with that, with the enterprise fund, all the revenue stays within the Parking Commission and goes to further the parking program. None of our parking funds go back into the general fund to buy a fire truck or fill in potholes or anything like that. So in the 70s, our parking program was mainly focused on street management. And there was a threat from the malls, and like Bozeman, they made the choice to get rid of their meters because they felt that they were unfriendly and they wanted to encourage shoppers to come downtown. Missoula decided not to get rid of their meters and kept them, and fortunately what that has done for us provided a constant revenue stream to put back into that parking fund and develop it more fully. So, so that was the 70s. In the 80s, it was a philosophy like, oh, there's some tension growing in this part of downtown, there's a parking problem, we need to fix it, let's build an off-street lot. So what happened there, we issued an SID. Through the SID, we developed 12 off-street lots, mainly for employee parking. Then in the 90s, we built Central Park, which is our parking structure on Main Street. And again, the philosophy was, let's build our way out of these problems. But at the same time, coming into everybody's awareness was, you're never going to build yourself out of a parking problem. At $27,000 a parking space, you can't continue to do that. Your demand is always going to exceed that. So what you need is a good balance between the two. Parking commissions are always going to have to build some inventory. Yet at the same time, you can deal with the demand by providing alternative options for employees who can't afford to pay $65 to park in the parking structure per month. So during the 90s, we started doing this balancing act by dedicating quite a bit of money towards supporting alternative transportation. And then in the last 10 years, we've really focused on the role that parking can play on economic development. And we have gone into a lot of kind of sub-strategies of partnering up with our marketing and looking at public partnerships and doing a lot more with education and really understanding more that parking management is incredibly complex and it needs to have a good balance, and you constantly need to be evaluating the ratios of your on-street rates and your off-street rates, your ratio between the rates and the fines and so forth. Some of that is way more advanced than a lot of you who are coming from small cities, but what I wanted to do was share with you kind of where parking commissions can go and what they can do, how you can grow them. I mentioned that I was just in Duluth, and they really were at odds between their BID, their downtown association, their police department. They had police officers ticketing, the Public Works was doing the on-street stuff, and they didn't know what was happening, and citizens were complaining to them. And so basically they just said, we need some help. So they brought in this advisory panel and we analyzed it. And because it was so fractioned off in so many different directions, the community didn't even know who the parking commission was. They had a kind of advisory board, but they had no authority to do anything. So basically, they were just kind of a little bit of a face, but oh, just kidding, you can't do anything. So our final recommendation to them, as we presented to all the media and all the stakeholders yesterday morning, was they needed to establish an entity to manage their parking. So that's basically what my message is, and why don't we now just entertain questions, and we'll bring Chris back up and James, and if you have any questions about how do you build a parking structure, or how do you develop a good alternative transportation program, or anything more about managing on-street parking. Any comments? Yes?
Do you distinguish between, on your off-street parking, between what's available to the public as opposed to private use off-street parking?
Well, typically our philosophy is that most of the public who are short-term parkers want to be on-street. They don't want to go to an off-street lot, but if you have an off-street lot that's strategically placed, then you can incorporate meters as well as monthly parking for employees. Typically, you put the employees in the off-street lots, and further out they go, the less expensive the monthly charge is.
But we don't have meters in those towns, but we have an awful lot of on-street parking lots that are for private use only.
Oh, you mean privately owned?
Privately owned.
Right. Are they empty?
Well, a lot of the times it might be the American Legion, a club or something that for their patrons only.
Yeah, a strategy that's becoming more and more popular is to look at churches and American Legions and things like that that are in your downtown. The worst thing you want is to have a parking lot with all kinds of spaces sit empty. You need to, reach out to them, say, okay, you've got a meeting at American Legion from 12 to 1 on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but the rest of the time, you could maybe do a shared use of that and use it for employees, knowing that maybe they can't park there during the lunch hours or whatever. Or churches. Typically, they have their evening activities and weekend activities, not during the week. So look at those as real resources and opportunities for public-private partnership. And you can work out all kinds of contracts. The 12 off-street lots we have a different contract for each one, depending upon what the private entity wants. So you have an open book there. Yes?
Do you allow advertising in your parking garage? And if so, can you talk about that a little bit?
We don't. And I know that is well utilized in a lot of cities. We just haven't done that. It's something we certainly would entertain, though.
Have you had any inquiries about that?
No, not at all. What I wanted, of course, parking structures need to be clean and well lit and whatnot. Maybe, Chris, you have something.
Cindy Anders is from Bozeman and is our city commissioner and the liaison to the parking commission, which I failed to mention I hold a seat on. So, and one quick note I did have, and then I'll address the advertising issue, and that is, if you do have a parking commission, it's, I think, imperative that you have whoever is managing your downtown, and we all have different organizations and structures and managers or directors, but they need to have a seat on the parking commission. In fact, the parking commission, once you get the seat on the parking commission as your downtown director, then get it in the bylaws that one of the seats will be for your predecessor or always for the downtown representative, because downtowns and parking are obviously inextricably linked. So that's one thing I just would recommend. The issue we have with advertising in our garage is, as I mentioned, we sawed off our main revenue source in 1979, that being the meters. So we do have an enterprise fund as well, but we're constantly struggling to look at how to maximize our revenues because we have limited sources only through enforcement fines, and now through monthly parking permits for employees, and now with the garage that obviously generates revenue. So we're looking at advertising as another potential revenue source. Obviously, if you are seeing whether it's a surface lot or a parking garage well utilized, that's your customer base. Businesses want to advertise to customer bases. So it's an interesting quandary for a city, a public entity, to have private advertising. Gives the city attorney quite a bit to scratch their head on and look through case law and the code to see if it's allowed or write a code to allow it. So that's, I think, the
good question.
Basis of Cindy's, and like we're all learning here in this conference, quite often you don't have to reinvent the wheel, whether it's how do you manage shared parking agreements on church lots, or what do you do about more complicated issues that maybe just a few of the communities deal with, like advertising in garages. We can certainly learn from one another and hopefully share resources.
Good. Well, I think we're almost out of time, Julie. Can we entertain a few more questions, or?
Definitely. You have quite a bit of time.
Okay, great.
11:30, you say.
Oh, 11:30. Oh, great. Okay.
I could be wrong, Ray, you can correct me. I think Billings, your BID and your downtown association manage your parking? Okay, all right. Well, our BID in Great Falls, we have essentially nothing to do with our parking commission. I'm the sole employee and I only work 20 hours a week, and our downtown association has a sole employee who only works 25 hours a week. We are listed as an ex officio member of our parking commission, but we don't attend meetings, which I wish my board would do. But anyways, our parking chair now seriously wants to see the meters removed. And our contract, which has been a 10 or however long year contract with standard parking, expires the end of this year. So he feels a great deal of pressure to do that now. And now there's been pressure from other members within the community put on the BID to take over parking management. And again, we're in no position to do that. I'm the sole employee. But I don't know what, if anything, you would speak to that. Obviously, I was wrong. Buildings doesn't manage their parking. Missoula's BID and Downtown Association doesn't manage their parking, and the same for Bozeman, correct?
Correct.
But Helena does.
Helena does. And our parking commissioner has spoken with you, actually, Jim, Phil Kaiser. And he came back raving and went on and on and on about the BID needs to take this on now. And I'm cowering under my desk. You know, but I mean, there's possibilities that a great deal of change are going to take place or not with the parking and the removal of meters. And obviously, you're far too young to speak to the removal of meters in 1974. But, you know, I just don't.
Okay, a couple of things. A question back to you. What's the role that the city plays? Did they set up the commission?
I don't know if they set a commission, and I don't know when. I do know all of our funding goes into the general fund, which is a huge bone of contention.
You mean all the revenue from the parking?
The revenue goes to the general fund, and the city will not give that up. So even if meters are removed, they want fines hugely escalated so that they continue to generate the money they want to need.
Yeah, that's a typical scenario because that revenue is addictive.
Yeah.
And especially in the economic environment that we have now with cities. That was a big issue with Duluth. I mean, they were getting $4 million in revenue, and they were only giving back to the parking commission $1 million. That's a tough one. I mean, I agree you don't have the resources within the other agencies to handle parking, and you know, I would like to think that the city believes strong enough that they will set up a commission that has some authority and put a face to that entity. My advice would be not to pull the meters because then you lose a tremendous revenue source. But if that revenue is going to the general fund, it's really not going to promoting parking programs and building a reserve so that they can do more down the road. This is a difficult thing. Perhaps you need to have a parking professional come and talk to the city managers and council people and encourage them because, like I said, parking management is incredibly complex and it gets kind of really strange because of the whole revenue aspect. And you're not going to have an effective program down 20 years from now if you don't build in a mechanism to build that reserve, that money base. And if you don't have meters, then you're going to have zones, probably maybe 2-hour zones. Who's going to enforce those? That takes even more employee resources to manage that. Then if it's not well managed, like I addressed earlier, it's not going to be well respected, and you're going to have employees sitting there, and you're not going to have any turnover whatsoever on your on-street parking for the retailers who really need to have that availability for their customers. So it's, as I keep saying, it's extremely complex, and so removing the meters right now, if I were to come up and make any kind of recommendation, would not be to do that. I don't know about how much standard parking is charging the city for managing it, but I would imagine if the city really analyzed it, they could figure out a way to manage their on-street parking in such a way that would still keep their comfort zone and not jeopardize some of the revenue, and then make an agreement that perhaps phase out the dependency on that revenue, but a commitment to put revenue aside into the parking commission to start developing it. Does that make sense?
Thank you, yes, thank you.
And actually, you know, one strategy is, you know, the typical sort of city leadership of we don't want to do the work, but we're going to keep all the money. Mm-hmm. So, you know, you have limited resources through your association and your BID, but you can just volley back a fastball and say, we'll take over the parking with all the meter revenues, all the money going to the contract to standard, and all the fines generated. Mm-hmm. You know, you can't, parking is hard politics in most places. And so you would, you know, perhaps you inherit a lot of responsibilities in a pretty complicated program, but you have to demand all the funding, you know, in return. Start an enterprise fund where every dollar generated by parking management goes back to parking management. The minute you cut down those meters will be the minute they'll never go back in.
Right.
As Bozeman's learned, and although I wasn't there in '74, I owned a business on Main Street, the meterless Main Street, for 15 years prior to the position I'm in now. And even though, like I said, that's our upside down cake of eliminating our revenue source, which Missoula has greatly benefited from, and Billings as well, it causes, issues, and you're back into that perception versus reality. Oh, there's free parking, that's great. Well, now 2 hours isn't enough, and now there's, So certainly, if you want to even consider taking over parking, which is a powerful tool to be in control of as the downtown organizations, you're going to have to play hardball and demand that you get all the revenues generated by it. And it's going to come down to, obviously, a political battle at your commission level.
And another thing to think about, if it goes to, say, the police department or whatever within the city, they don't give a rip about customer service and economic development. Within a BID or in conjunction with your downtown association, it's all about customer service, and that's the way parking should be. It's not about fines and writing tickets and as I said, being punitive and heavy-handed. That does nothing to grow your downtown and bring customers there. So at least with it located within the BID, in fact, that's one of our recommendations that we just made to Duluth. They have an outstanding BID and just a crackerjack gal at the head of it. She is so understanding of customer friendliness, of economic development, and the role that parking can play in it. We recommended that entity takes over because they understand what parking should really be. So you want to have control of it. Yes?
In the city of Kalispell, we have a parking commission and a full-time enforcement officer. However, many years ago, the downtown businesses determined that removing of the parking meters was the best thing to do to create an environment in which you could get the shoppers that would want to come downtown so that they didn't compete with the other entities or the free parking from the major parking lots, in north of town, whatever. So we don't have the parking meters. However, now what we have downtown is 2-hour enforcement, and our enforcement officer goes around, tags the cars. We have downtown employees who are parking in the 2-hour spots and rocking and rolling. And so we still don't have the customer-friendly availability of those storefront parking spots available. In my estimation, the only answer to it is to install parking meters back again. I don't know what else we could do, and I was wondering if you could offer any advice.
Well, certainly, one option that comes to mind, and it goes back to sort of what we talked about with Lewistown, is it really has to come from the employers to change that employee behavior, and that is hard. I mean, employers and small businesses wear 40 different hats. The last thing they want to worry about, although it should be maybe one of the first things, is where their employees are parking. And the discussion is, if your employees are parking wherever they feel like it, they're taking up the space that your customer would use to come into your business.
Unless it's not a customer-based business.
Exactly.
If it's a
second floor that doesn't rely on walk-in traffic. Yep, huge issue. But again, have the owner of the deli talk to the real estate agency owner and say, you like the sandwiches? Well, we're not going to be here if your employee takes up the spaces all throughout the day and not provide that for our customers. But there's a lot of surface parking, I guarantee it, a block or two away from the areas of greatest concern. And if it is a church or some other sort of facility where you can do shared use parking during the day for more of a nighttime lot, and then have the employers partner to encourage, force, it's where you get to the punitive heavy-handedness perhaps, peer pressure, to park, off-street through either shared use agreements or other sort, then you have the problem of pushing employee parking into neighborhoods, and then there's that conflict potentially, which we certainly have in in certainly Bozeman, and I see Jim nodding. And so, some solutions can potentially create other problems, but it really has to come from, and there are statistics too, and it ranges greatly, of what that parking space is worth. And it's not the $27,000 to build one somewhere else, but what it's worth in customer dollars, $40,000 to $70,000 a year each space in some communities. And you can start to share some of that information, and you can get a lot of peer pressure within your business community, where the owner of the women's clothing store is talking to the lawyer upstairs and saying, hey, this doesn't work, and try and come up with some common solutions. Not a specific answer, but in theory, that's one approach.
We have done that repeatedly. And there's some violators that are going to continue to be violators, and their employees just don't care, and they're going to park where they want to park.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm a little bit jaded after 17 years because, you do try to do, talk to them. I meet with them. I tell them what's the right thing to do. They really don't care. And nothing I can say would make them care. So again, I think you have to look. I mean, with you having time zones and whatnot, it's a matter of enforcement. And then it's also a matter to offer your employees a menu of choices. We offer downtown employees who are members of the MDA a free bus pass. So we give them that. I offer long-term meters on the periphery that they can pay for $1 a day for parking. We have $30 a month lots that are farther away, but like I said to you earlier, your most expensive parking should be your most convenient. As it gets less convenient, it's less expensive. Give them choices, but what they have to do is they have to have that stick, that their behavior of leapfrogging and rocking and rolling on the valuable on-street parking spaces is not an option. So they need to, and I don't know, I just think that has to be really clear that that's unacceptable. I think putting meters in would do a good, you had them and then took them out, didn't you? Yeah, I remember that transition. And then you jacked up your overtime fine to $20, and then you had to back it down to $15 because it was just too much. So again, that whole rate and fine ratio is really important, that it be in balance and in sync with the entire parking program. You just can't take one little piece, chew it to death, and make a decision, and then go over here and do some other kind of parking strategy over here. It needs to be well thought out. There has to be a plan, and they have to relate to one another. Otherwise, you're just going to have all these little spot fires all over the place, and it's not going to be customer friendly. It's not going to bring people to the downtown, and it's not going to lead to further economic development. So,
would you suggest parking meters back again?
I would, because I'm such a proponent of what that revenue can do. You look at the Missoula Parking Commission, and I'm proud of it. After 40 years, we have 10 employees. We have a huge reserve in the bank, where now we're entertaining building an $8 million structure using $4 million of our cash reserves. Well, we've gathered a lot of $2 tickets to build up $4 million. And then we've got the bonding capacity for $4 million more, because we've got such a good revenue stream going between our off-street, our fines, and but we only have 3 opportunities for revenue. Fines, on-street rates, and leases, yeah. And so there are not a lot of opportunities to build those revenue streams. You can do an SID, but if you have a BID, that SID is not going to be as easily initiated, because the property owners are already being taxed for the amenities for downtowns. So that's a bit tricky. Pay in lieu of programs, I think Bozeman started out with that, and that became problematic and tends to continue to be problematic. So I'm pretty adamant about taking every opportunity you can to build that revenue. There's an adage that says you never give away free parking. And there's a lot to be said for that. Why should you give it away? Donald Shoup, in his book, which is extremely valuable, Jewelers don't give away free rings. Why should we give away free parking? There's a value to it, and when you put a value on it, it becomes respected, and then if it's looked in a comprehensive way, it works.
Thanks.
Just a quick comment, there is no such thing as free parking.
Right.
I mean, somebody's paying in some capacity, but part of the mission through the BID and using parking as an economic development tool, it's real estate management. And, you know, sometimes you just have to beat them, and you either have to go and boot them. And once you put a boot out there, or even, and we've done this once, we put a boot on one of our own vehicles. And all of a sudden, all those fines start getting paid and stuff, and people start moving. The other aspect to it, if you don't have it on the ordinance, is put in the rolling ordinance, they have to move without like a 2-hour area by 2 blocks or something of that nature. And then you have an enforcement tool to do it, so.
And do you have any experience with escalating fines for repeat offenders?
That's up close and personal to us. In fact, our board last Thursday just approved a new fine structure. And the philosophy is make it fairly light at the front, because you don't want the occasional person who just mistakenly got a fine to be, feel like it's real punitive. But then it escalates real quickly. So we're going to start with our meter violation at 5, the second meter violation 10, 15, 20, and any violation after that within a 1-year period stays at 20. We're kind of unique because we write 2 tickets at one time if the violations are appropriate. We write a meter ticket and an overtime ticket. So this escalating fine schedule can be real punitive real fast. Now, we'll be very careful when we initiate it, how we're going to do it in public education and do good marketing PR, because at the same time what we're going to do is offer 1 hour free in our parking structure. So we're going to focus on the 1 hour free at the parking structure. Have that be customer friendly. I have a real issue when people try to say that fines should be customer friendly. What about breaking an ordinance should be customer friendly? I know it can happen, so we should be fairly light at the beginning, but it should escalate, and in no time flat, those people who are abusing it are going to find an alternative, whether it's taking the bus because they can't afford an off-street lot lease, or I don't know, park further out at our 10-hour meters or whatever. But they're going to make choices. Again, it's that carrot and stick, and sometimes that stick has to be pretty brutal.
You have time for one more quick question, if anyone has any.
Okay.
How many square feet of commercial space did you sell in that parking garage?
It was, I think it was approximately 10,000 square feet. And we sold it all of it to one developer, and they subdivided and either leased or sold from there.
And another quick question, public restrooms, who owns those?
That is part of the city property, and how the whole structure is condominiumized between the city public parking components and then the private components. Also, that area serves as the indoor seating area, if you will, for the transit, and so the bus system actually contributes to the maintenance of the that room and the associated restrooms, but they are publicly owned.
Does the parking garage have a service area established? Like, how far will they walk after they leave the garage and put shop or?
Well, there's definitely different schools of thought about what people's tolerance is for walking, certain distances. I mean, we see certainly most of the use, I'm sure, is concentrated within about a 2-block, radius. And I think depending on the demand on special events where you've got 5,000 people coming down for a concert or the Christmas event, then obviously they're going to use the facility and potentially walk further. We have a parking requirement reduction for new development or changes in use if they're within, I think it's 500-foot radius of the garage, so we factor that into the parking requirement, the proximity of the project to the garage, so you can leverage that, and you can do that with we do that with surface lots as well in some cases, so you can leverage those higher density parking inventories to reduce the requirements on the surrounding properties.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, and I'll be around, so will Chris and James, so if you have any further questions, just grab us. Thank you.